for joining us today. Our session, Harnessing the Power of Storytelling for Climate Action. We're really excited to have this conversation with you. And with further ado, I'm just going to get started and tell you a little bit about the session and introduce our panelists here. So my name is Bari Samad. I'm the Director of Communications at Second Nature. I come from a background in environmental justice and socioeconomic and the intersections of socioeconomic and environmental justice. Today's session is, based on three themes. One is a larger storytelling for climate action. I work for Second Nature, and so we are always talking about climate action and, how does storytelling fit into this work that we're all doing. One of the things around that larger first theme, which I will put up here. Gotta get used to this clicker thing. So those are the three themes. And so the larger theme sort of is actually the first topic, like what are some of the things that are, that facilitate storytelling for climate action, and what are some of the barriers that many of us face in universities and colleges. And then looking at what types of stories are we telling? And what are the stories that aren't being told? So my background is also in ethical storytelling, so it weaves right into how are we telling these stories? Are we telling them ethically? We'll talk about some of what that actually means, ethical storytelling. So those are the three broad themes, and I want to introduce our three panelists. Let's move on to that slide. We have with us today Sophia Aktara, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the Washington State Board of Community College. So, Sophia, do you want to say anything for a minute? Or?
No, I'm going to stay where I really.
Okay, perfect. And Nick Schweitzer here is the Media Specialist at the College of Menominee Nation at their Sustainable Development Institute. And we have Andrew Bernier, who is a professor at the University of Cincinnati. So, one of the things we wanted to just quickly do is just by a show of hands, can you tell us a little bit about where you're coming from? Just a few folks, if you're, what role do you play in your campus? What's your role? Just want to get a sense of who's in the room. Could be faculty or it could be sustainability.
You're it.
Yeah, that's it.
My name is Nick Atlin. I'm a transportation analyst with the CSU Office of the Chancellor. So kind of not really in any of these neat little bubbles that a lot of the presentations have been going on, touching on today, but really at the center of it all, it touches everything. So I'm very interested in how to better communicate the challenges and really try to find dollars to help address those challenges. That's where I'm coming from.
Got it. A couple other folks, just there's no pressure and we can move on. Yes?
Oh, me?
Yes.
Okay. My name is Alyssa Thomas, and I'm the Director of Sustainability and Transportation Demand Management at California State University, Fullerton. And I am really interested in how to share the stories that aren't typically heard, and kind of raise those up so that they can be heard and seen.
Great. I think someone raised their hand in the back too.
I'm Sarah Schlosky. I'm a communications manager for sustainability at the University of Utah, and I'm excited to hear just how other people are talking about sustainability and how they are putting sustainability and equity, diversity, inclusion all kind of together.
Perfect. So we'll have a chance for all of us to connect if you want to sign up, and I think there's an opportunity to develop a little community of people who want to tell stories, so we'll talk about that a little more. Thank you for sharing that. So we're going to jump right in. So the first thing we want to do is show you some examples that we kind of pulled together of types of storytelling, and the first is actually a comic book that Nick developed, and I'll let him talk about that, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the other two.
Yeah, I'm going to grab this real quick. Yeah, so this comic book is actually a piece of work that was created by Justin Gothier and I. If anyone's seen Reservation Dogs, he was on the final episode of the final season as Vinny, the Undertaker. just in case if you want a context of who he is. But the narrative is about the Menominee tribe investigating the circumstances and consequences of an ancient recessive plant that has returned to our ecosystem and the circumstances that...
And we'll jump to your slide in a second. Yes.
Sounds good.
Sorry. And so then we're going to show a video of Falmouth University across the pond over in the UK. And finally, I'm going to show an example of an ArcGIS story map. I don't know if folks have seen story maps, but it's an amazing tool. So let's just get started, and Nick can continue what he was saying about the comic book.
Yes, my apologies. So this is some of the artwork of it, but pretty much it's taking a theoretical model about Menominee sustainability practices and presenting it in a different way. So you can see some imagery of it in the top right corner, but the narrative works throughout it to integrate it as well as with storytelling, and also some fun plant aspects of it. As you can see on the far right of the screen, that is a mycorrhizome situation that is dictating the page layout. So it's an integration of both science and art in a different way to kind of like try to create STEAM while also making it accessible to anyone at any level. Yeah, so.
So the next one is the video, and I'll see if I can play it. This is from Falmouth University. We really liked it, but I'm also curious to hear what you'll think later. So I'll just play this. Hopefully it's not too loud.
We're in the midst of a climate and ecological crisis. At Falmouth University, we're taking action, instilling a culture of sustainability and making impactful changes to our operations. In the last 3 years, we've invested in tools that have measured our environmental footprint, which has informed our sustainability strategies across all areas of the university. We've interrogated our energy use, transport emissions, consumption, water use, our waste, our supply chain, and our purchasing habits. We're currently delivering our operational plans on a reduction-first principle. That means we're primarily looking at measures to reduce our existing carbon footprint rather than offsetting the emissions we produce. We're also delivering against our responsible procurement strategy, which will ensure that goods and services are purchased in a sustainable and efficient way. And we're supporting companies we work with to become more sustainable in the process too. Students at Falmouth enjoy some of the most extraordinary scenery the UK has to offer. The setting inspires creativity, which is why we make every effort to maximise the biodiversity of our beautiful campuses. And to help initiate a new generation of creative thinking, we're embedding sustainability into the curriculum of every single course we offer. Our graduates will leave the university with the knowledge and skills to become environmentally conscious creatives. Our academics and researchers are embracing new technologies and methodologies, challenging the way we consume, exploring how biodiversity can be integrated into a rapidly changing landscape, and generating new alliances and ways of conducting environmental arts research. And our students are paving the way for a more sustainable future too. The Student Union offers loads of ways to engage, whether that's through clubs and societies, participating in Sustainability Week, or by joining the Green Committee to lobby the university into making more sustainable changes. For us, sustainability isn't something to be achieved or a box to tick. It's about instilling a culture of sustainability in everything we do, continually developing the way we do business, driving sustainable behaviour changes, and empowering our people to take action.
So one of the things I wanted to say was this, every school is going to have something different that they're going to emphasize. What was really interesting for me was like that in 2 minutes and 30 seconds, they covered a lot of specific things. And so and how do you engage somebody in video in this day and age where videos are so common? And so the next one is a really interesting example. What I wanted to, before I play this, this was created by students from a Second Nature signatory school, Whitman College, and it won the ArcGIS Student Storytelling Challenge. Actually, it was a finalist, close to winning. And the cool part about this is and I want to say in advance, this is a website, and I'll share the link with you at the end of the presentation so you can really immerse yourself. But GIS is really complex sometimes, and story maps is a really amazing tool to simply tell stories with multiple media types, audio, video, narrative. And I really like this project, kind of harkening back to something that Tim was talking about in the opening plenary, like the land that we live in. So I picked this one in particular, and I'm going to play it and show you a few features. It'll scroll a little fast, but again, I'll share the link with you so you can immerse yourself later.
Can you just move the mic closer to you?
Oh, sure. Is that's better? Okay, sorry about that. So let me go ahead and play it with further ado, and again, pardon the fast scrolling and stuff, but it's an amazing tool and a great story. So let's see if that scrolls. Yeah, so. And it's interesting how it breaks up the information in ways that then makes the information digestible and more immersive. You can also embed complex GIS maps if you like, but not required. That's me scrolling, sorry. Fast.
The sagebrush that's winter resistant, the orchards and the farm workers that pick them. We have to listen to the spirit of Kawichi and the land that voiced it. Couldn't simply live here without acknowledging their role.
And on the website, there's ways you can go around and through the menu and work through different parts. It's like you can move around and do as much as you want or as little as you want. One of the interesting things about this project was it weaves together histories and lived experiences of the Yakama Nation, the Nez Perce tribe, African American loggers, Japanese and Latino immigrants all in that area.
And we survive through art and music and food and storytelling.
Right, so again, we'll share the link with you to watch the whole thing and work through it. And definitely a lot of schools have GIS or story maps, so it's almost available. Just have to find the right people who've already paid for it. So it's a really easy tool to get. So we'll start our discussion, and the first item we wanted to talk about with the panelists is like what I put up there is like, based on the themes of this sort of discussion today, what has been your approach to and examples of effective storytelling that you've led in higher education? So moving to Nick, and talk about your work.
Yeah, I'll take the remote. My realm is more so unearthing unheard stories, but in order to start there, I have to give a little context. So I work for the Indigenous Scientific Research Institute for the College of Menominee Nation, known as the Sustainable Development Institute. Our institute researches multiple realms of interest that benefit and actually are selected by members of our tribe. So we are working for our tribe and researching things that they are interested in. Some of those realms are climate change, forest and phenology, sustainable agriculture and food sovereignty, water and geoscience, and there's some more. And within our research, we do a blend of traditional ecological knowledge and scientific ecological knowledge. So that is the context. So in order to share our research we utilize stories, at least in the past 10 to 15 years as I've been a part of the Institute. And that is sort of because storytelling is an innate trait to indigenous people and other people throughout the entire world. As our people have it, we have oral tradition, which is a way to share what we know with our descendants and everything that goes forward. So that is an innate way of sharing knowledge that is utilized by us. So as we are a smaller institution and fairly young, we just celebrated our 30th anniversary last year. We have to work in two realms in order to share our stories. The first one is to nurture storytelling capacity within our community. So one of the ways that we do that is via our Sustainable Leadership Cohort, which is a high school cohort that introduces both media and storytelling skills mixed with sustainability to gather interest within our youth, while teaching them the skills of media as a way to share that story via their research. And that was actually something that I was a part of as a high schooler about over 10 years ago. I'm slowly realizing that I'm a little older than I think I am. But that is something that is utilized by the Institute to empower our youth, but also build capacity and skills with our younger generation. And then also at our institute level, since we work with college students, we have a lot of interns that we work with student-driven research. And for that, we actually give them the tools to share their research as a media deliverable, sometimes as videos and other aspects. So on this side, I have a couple examples. The top two are from the SLC. The actual top left one is my very first video, which I did animation for at age 15, having zero context for. But then also below are some media deliverables that are sharing the information in multiple ways. On the middle section with the sort of presentation actually is a video of our Visualizing Forest Futures vlog series, which is kind of like half Office, half It's Always Sunny, half sometimes Rocky Balboa, as a way to document the process that we were researching environmental impacts that would have effect on the forest via climate change. I believe that year was wind damage. But then also our students share their media. On the left, right next to that, is a TikTok about our survey of edible plants with two of our interns sharing their information. So there are multiple different ways to go about it, as well as ways that we utilize technology as a way to share stories via our youth and our college level students as a way to empower them and build capacity for our next generation. The other one is utilizing existing community and or network storytelling capacity. And this is through collaboration and people that we already identify in our community. So the first example I have is the POSO project, which funded the SLC. That was an Indigenous scientific curriculum project in collaboration with UW-Madison. And for that, it brought in two people, Peruvian filmmaker, now Dr. Ronaldo Morales, who worked for UW-Madison to create accompanying video curriculum for the overarching indigenous curriculum that was being created that talked about energy and other climate change aspects. And I believe there were two curriculum projects that were created for the 7th and 9th grades. But he worked in partnership to help share our story with that, as well as with Menominee writer Justin Judd Gauthier to write the curriculum for it, while also infusing storytelling as a through line through the curriculum. And then also my project, Project Comics. Since I've gotten trained, I'm now part of that community capacity, as well as Judd, and that was a piece of media that we wanted to talk about the theoretical model, which I talked about earlier, through the lens of comics. But then also, you can do it with external collaborators that you worked with in the past, such as our work with PBS Wisconsin and attributing organizations, where they come in and ask to tell a little aspect of our story and build a relationship with us, and we work collaboratively with them. So that is the ways that we work to tell stories in a way with building capacity, but also utilizing existing capacity. And I believe that's the end of my slides, so then I will pass it down.
And folks, if you have questions, hold on to them, because we have a whole section for Q&A with everyone.
We do want those questions. I'm sure they're beautiful. A little background on me. So I've had a kind of a multi-tiered career that has somehow wound up in academia, but I was a classroom teacher for 6 years, teaching STEM and sustainability. I then made a random pivot into public radio, and that's me interviewing Ernest Moniz, the former energy secretary. There's a lot of parade of secretaries today, former secretaries, that is. And then I managed a youth media nonprofit with underserved communities and youth. And my world has very much been in this audio sense, but we did web platforms, multimodal, multimedia, audio, art integration, much like an ArcGIS story maps. That's several different mediums of text and audio and video and photo. There's a nice diversity range, and that's part of what I was trying to get at as I helped, and part of it was launching the Arizona Science Innovation Desk, which was a consortium of public media stations to help work with advancing stories of science, tech, health across the state. And in that time, I worked a lot with universities, research institutions like Arizona State, University of Arizona, and now I work within those capacities. Part of my work has actually been trying to help tease out the differences of when we talk about stories. So, for instance, when we just watched that movie, that short about Falmouth, you actually saw a lot more about almost a promotional, if you will, or at least telling about what they're doing. And that is a form of communication, but when we get into this idea of what is the story, we need to figure out where we're going. So, of course, I'm in academia, so we do a lot of publishing and reporting, and then also when I was in public radio, needing to be aware of what is reporting. But I've noticed that there actually needs to be a pretty intentional approach as to when we do storytelling. And so, and that helps to unearth some of the messages and narratives that often go overlooked. So I have this form here, and I see people taking pictures of it. That's awesome. But I'm going to go left or right. So such as reporting, to whom do we report to? We report professional growth. We add to a field of contribution if we go publishing. What is the focus of that? And we think about, well, it's an attention to phenomena that we want to measure, or, hey, we're doing this great thing. We want to say, okay, here's the data in which we gathered as to why we're going to do it. And the intent, we try to reduce our bias when we do reporting and publishing, and we want to also try to convey a process of, hey, here was the process in which we went about either doing this research or observing a phenomenon in the natural world or social settings. Actually, then on the far right is promotion, where a lot of, I would say, some sustainability messaging exists, and this could be in higher education, it could be in the corporate world. The reason why we do promotion as a communication strategy is to for self or organizational gain. I imagine Falmouth put that video out there to attract other students interested in that space. There happens to be more of an attention to stuff or service when we do promotion, and less so about the individuals or people who are putting forth the work that's being showcased. And in the intent is oftentimes it is driven by success, or it is driven by outcomes. And so I imagine, in the work I've done at Arizona State University and now the University of Cincinnati, we don't get into what's then more in that middle column, the narrative, where we are we helping our audience? Are we actually teaching those who are consuming the story that which we're telling? And so it is meant to, when we tell stories, we think about this is meant to benefit those who are listening. Yes, we have knowledge and experience that we want to share, but it's not so much we want to toot our own horn and call it a day. It's to make sure that the story and the message and the lesson is conveyed. And that's where we put the focus on the people and their experience within the story. So when I was watching the Falmouth video, I want to know what was going on with students. What were they doing on the day-to-day of the ground? Can we zoom in on one of those projects? And then the main thing that I want to really hear about, what was the conflict and struggle of those individuals? And when we get a showcase of how people are learning and how they are being faced with obstacles and then overcoming them, that's the narrative. I mean, we think about the hero's journey structure in storytelling, it is the darker moments that pulls us in. And that's where we want to not lose sight of that, particularly in higher education settings, where each one of these stories can be a lesson in of itself. So down below, and I'm going to wrap this in just a moment, this all comes down to your desired level of control. So when you are reporting, you have a hyper-focused level of control. You have a very intentional audience. Whereas if you're doing promotion, you're just putting it out there in the ether. You actually want as many eyes to consume as you can. But when you think about narrative, you do have an audience in mind, and you have an intent behind it, but you also want it to be as resonating with as many people as possible. So the questions I leave you with then are, how can you, or what can you do, be it with your service or product directly? What can you help with indirectly? So as in, are you tapping into other people's visions who want to be part of your story? And then how can you help others achieve the vision that you want to share? And that's that shared invitation to the stories to help amplify others' wishes to be part of it. And it does help benefit and promote your own at the same time. So this part right here, storytelling is the most common denominator. And I have found that had to be absolutely true with students, particularly those students whose voices have often been ignored, let alone unheard. And so you don't need to dumb things down. And with respect to traditional ecological knowledge, storytelling has been by far the most effective mechanism of teaching and conveying critical information from one generation to another. However, we need to make sure that when we craft that message, it's accessible, hence why it's beautiful, the multitudes of media and technology in which we have to convey a story, make it memorable, and make it meaningful. And the way you make something memorable is you make it easy for someone to see themselves within your story. That's why we focus on characters. If you only have one shot to communicate, entice them with story, give audience some facts to walk away, educate with, and leave them with the empowerment to learn more. One project that I did with Arizona State was based off of circular economy, which can be anybody work with circular economy, procurement? Okay, it can be very dry, but I worked with several startups and initiatives within Arizona State to actually do a short podcast series to help talk about these entrepreneurs and startups, about their struggle and then success of getting circular economy projects off the ground. And that helps to convey some of the competence needed for people who wanted to enter the circular economy space. And that was incredible. And Finn.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Sophia Akdam, she, her pronouns. I am joining you from the traditional homelands of the Puyallup people in Tacoma, Washington, and work in Olympia, which is the traditional homelands of the Nisqually and the Squaxin Island people. I put up a quote here, and I know it's probably hard to see in the back, so I will read it. And it's a quote from the book, The Four Pivots, Reimagining Justice, Reimagining Ourselves by Dr. Sean Ginwright. And it says, addressing racism, fighting sexism, and reducing violence are all important. But reductions in these things are not victories in and of themselves, because eliminating things that harm us is not the same as creating things that heal us. And I think, I work at the intersections of DEI, belonging, sustainability, right, which is a very kind of amorphous word that is hard to even describe and find where we fall or where we sort of fit into that word. And I think we talk so much about, harm reduction and mitigation, but not so much about, the invitation to imagine a world that maybe doesn't exist yet, but can be possible, right? And so I think part of the power and the beauty of storytelling is this invitation to radically dream and radically imagine what can exist. And I think, for me, that's a place where we have to start, because I know we want to get into the technical, and I think we have to be able to imagine what we're moving towards, and if we can't, how do we chart a path to get there? And so I wanted to invite these words into our space today. And as we were frantically scribbling notes, because we were like, you have 6 minutes. What can you say in 6 minutes about sort of like maybe inspiring and encouraging storytelling? And for me, one of the things that we're working on, so I work for the state of Washington. I'm fortunate to live in a state that has provided funding for diversity, equity, anti-racism work. And part of that work is with our tribes. So we have a director of tribal affairs, and I think part of the understanding that folks have not quite arrived yet at is that tribes are sovereign nations, right? And so the ways that we relate with them and lean on them and invite them to lead are very different than the ways we might engage a stakeholder or a partner, right? And so those conversations are happening, and part of that, what we're doing is we've launched a Tribal Stewards program, which is to really create pathways for Indigenous Native folks to see themselves as co-managers and stewards of natural resources, right? Which they have been doing for generations and generations, right? And so how do we make explicit the ties between equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, and the indigenous and technical knowledges that exist? And so one of the projects that we've been working on is gathering these stories from elders and from our local regional tribes to help give voice and shape to and life to what folks might have encountered in a history or social studies class that might have been, not even a full chapter, right, of what they covered in Washington state history, for example. And so one of the pieces that came out of that is a clip that you'll see here. It's an interview with Billy Frank Jr.'s great-grandson. And for those who followed during the 60s, the Fish Wars, which really brought to light conversations and actions and activism that were happening about where tribes could fish and hunt and gather, right, on their usual and accustomed places, right, outside of their reservations. And so this is a short video, and the reason why I thought to bring it and share just a couple minutes with you, and I'm happy to share the library of videos, was to show that when we think about storytelling, for me it's always a question of whose stories are told and who gets to tell those stories, right? And so I would hope that as we think about the stories that we're telling to advance any of this work, that we would think about who are we telling stories on behalf of people, or are we just passing the mic or the pen or the keyboard, right, to the people who can be the best bearers and tellers of their own stories? And so a brief 2-minute video to give you a sense of what this collection looks like.
I think this place meant more to, our Nisqually people than folks realize. A lot of the work we're doing now with the schools, with the feds, the cities, local municipalities, it's all centered around wanting to know about us as Nisqually people. Like, we're going to come and go. This is going to be here. The tides are going to come in and out every day. Human beings, we're not in control. We like to think we're in control, but this is what's in control. This is what we need to be protecting right here. And for my father, this is what he spent a lifetime for. He told me stories about coming down here on Grandpa Willie's canoe. They paddle down here. He talked about as a kid with Maisel and Uncle Don and Uncle Sonny. And they'd hit flounder all day long. They'd go back up, and now Sugar even talked about that. When Sugar and our sister Maureen, who passed away, they'd come down here as kids and, hit flounder all day. We still catch flounder here and there, but, hearing those stories, that's what makes this special to me even more. I'm part of this legacy and I'm part of this area, and if nobody else wants to protect this, it's up to us, to work with all our stewards, all our good people who want to keep this place beautiful and clean. Having you in the boat, just hearing stories, talking. Sitting here with, I had Senator Cantwell, the governor, and Congresswoman Strickland. My boat on the Nisqually River, where 50 years ago my dad was getting thrown in jail. He was getting his ass kicked like many other, tribal fishermen. But it's like, that's change, that's progress right there. The fact that you have so many groups coming together on this project.
Thank you. And so I'll end this portion with just an invitation for you to continue reflecting as you think about the stories that are, bubbling up, right? And sometimes we have to make lots of different decisions about what a story advances. And I think, we have to move away from this sort of transactional capitalist understanding of like a story equals dollars, which I get it, right? And how do we rethink the power of story and its place in all of our work, whether we're in transportation and facilities and DEI, whether we're faculty, and understand it for the value that it brings, period, right? And so some invitation that I'm offering today is, what is being communicated to whom and how? Who is communicating the information on whose behalf? How is the messaging being filtered? How is information coming in and out? And what is the impact of this story some generations from now?
Thank you, Sophia, Andrew, and Nick. I've been working on this for a week or more, and I have so many questions just coming up today right now. So I'm hoping that you all have some. We have two questions that we want to ask the panelists, and before we turn over to audience question and answer. So I'm going to pivot over to those really quickly, and then we'll be back and hear from you all and see if you can ask the panelists some questions as well. So the second piece that we wanted to talk about was really like looking at, Second Nature works with our signatory institutions to do climate action plans. And so one of the questions we talked about that we would like to address, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you or here, the panelists, is like, well, how do you like create stories out of dry climate action plans that are technical? So I'm going to pose that over to the panel here, and let's see. And we'll start with Nick.
Yeah, so I mean, I have a meme on there just to engage a little bit. That's probably how you are feeling right now, as well as your audience. So creating compelling stories from academic level sources, it's kind of it's a constant battle. It's like you have all this information, but how do you get it to everyone? So part of it is that we've explored during our development of our process came from the comic book. Thank you. So, we have this academic paper that's about our Menominee theoretical model of sustainability, written by these great doctors, these great intellectual people. And I've read it a couple times, and I think I got maybe 50% of it now. So it is a constant understanding that has to be built. But it should be able to be translated easily as we attempted to with the comic book. So how do you get from step A to step B, the academic to a comic book in this example? So what we did, and there's a lot to it, we looked at the intent and the audience as a driver for how we wanted to approach it. So when writing the comic book, obviously, there needs to be a blend of people who understand the model deeply, but then also the creatives who have a background or are able to interpret it enough to share it. So that was sort of one of the steps that we took to make the story accessible. But also, it's a little bit of form-fixed function. When designing the story, Justin and I didn't want it to be one of those classic 90s cartoons where it's, yes, the aliens are invasion. How can we save ourselves? Yes, with the power of math. And I know as a kid that didn't really engage me. So, that's where that panel comes from. So we wanted to utilize the instructional material as the MacGuffin, the thing that drives the plot along. So in our story, our characters find the theoretical model and use it as a tool to solve their problems that in the community regarding the recessive plant. And that's my slide, so I'll pass it along.
Being able to compose a climate action plan is a beautiful endeavor. The fact that how many multiple stakeholders come into it is pretty wild. And I put this slide up here because I love it. I include this in a lot of my presentations. The emotional journey of creating anything great. So first off, a climate action plan is a plan of change, and it's really difficult to change how someone thinks or acts unless you change how they feel about it. So what is that emotional investment that you're getting into your community and campus and community members? And I know it's really small here, but basically it's wow, I've got a great idea. And then anyone who's actually been graduate school or anything like that goes into a black pit of despair once they actually start pursuing that cool idea. But then how far you actually get out into this is good enough or this is really great, especially when you cross that line, this is something I'm proud of and I want to share. And a climate action plan can actually be one of those projects. Is it something that you want to just bury on a random web page on your university's website because you just need to, ASHE says you need to have it? Or is it something you want to get out in public? I'm in the School of Education. My primary purpose is teaching, and I teach teachers, but I teach teachers STEM and sustainability. But as I also coach other faculty across my campus, I emphasize the point that if it's personal or professional, sustainability is constantly a practice. It is an action-oriented discipline. And for a climate action plan, my question to you is it also a lesson plan? Are you being able to equip those who are going to be executing your climate action plan in a way that they can see themselves in it, they can learn from it, and they can share with it? And so I think about the skills that you're going to have needed. Are you identifying them? Do you need to negotiate? Do you need to organize? Do you have future visioning? What's the knowledge that you need to have to execute your climate action plan? Are you going to be engaging your researchers? Is there something you need to outsource as far as knowledge gaining? For me, systems thinking is that mental discipline for sustainability. So how much are you actively acknowledging and deploying it within your climate action plan? And that's the beautiful thing, because that also speaks to networks and people and relationships and unearthing and sharing what those voices are, those concerns are, and how we are going to celebrate relationships. I mean, we think about collaboration that has been mentioned multiple times today. Bring those to light into your action plan. Shift the focus to how those knowledge and skills work together to execute what you're identifying in your climate action plan. And then you set yourself up for beautiful emergent opportunities. Because how many times is a climate action plan the actual reality 5 years afterwards? So many new things, aka pandemic, will show up to blow up your plan. That's what happened when University of Cincinnati put together there in 2019, and now we're revisiting it now to do other work. So basically, a diverse action plan is just like a diverse skill set. It's a resilient one. The wicked problems that you'll be taking on as a university are complex, but being a change agent, whether as a collaborative entity of offices on campus or individuals that are champions within the space, they got to artistically combine the skills and knowledge so well as they're identified to navigate that space of complexity with elegance and simplicity. And that's where you bring other people into the conversation if you want to broaden the impact of your climate action plan.
I'm a communal processor, so I have to bring in a lot of voices to the space when I present. And so I have a quote here from Adrienne Marie Brown, who wrote Emergent Strategy, and it says here, what we pay attention to grows. And I have a few bullet points here, but there are a few other voices that I wanted to bring into the space. And Andrew, as you were talking, it reminded me of a quote from James Baldwin that I saved, and it says, "You write in order to change the world, knowing perfectly well that you probably can't, but also knowing that literature or climate action plans is indispensable to the world. The world changes according to the way people see it, and if you alter even by a millimeter the way that people look at reality, then you can change it." So I think part of this work that we're doing and telling stories is this belief that if you change the story, you can change the world, right? And so words matter, what we put out there matters, and I think it can shape and build and tear down, right, the worlds that we want to exist. Another voice that I want to bring to the space is Grace Lee Boggs, who's an intersectional organizer in Detroit, and she wrote this. She says, "People are aware that they cannot continue in the same old way, but are mobilized because they cannot imagine an alternative." So back to this idea of like radical imagination. "We need a vision that recognizes that we are at one of the great turning points in human history when the survival of our planet and the restoration of our humanity require great sea change in our ecological, economic, political, and spiritual values." And so back to this quote from Adrienne Marie Brown, what we pay attention to grows. You know, I think if our action plans, maybe one of the versions of an action plan could be in a zine, right, or a comic, right? So I think as we think about telling stories, it's sort of like, what platform are we going to use? How are we going to tell the stories? Is it an oral thing? Is it a drawing? Is it a video? But if these action plans are roadmaps, you know, what are the imagination and dream spaces that they were born out of? And, you know, I think as we get older, we forget, or we are less inclined to go to that space. If you've read anything by Tricia Hersey, the NAP minister, or the NAP ministry that she has led for years, is this idea that like dreaming can actually open up a different portal to how we think about the world, right, and imagine ourselves in it, and imagine what collective liberation can look like. 1 minute. Okay, so are we willing to have these action plans be living documents, right? It could be a starting point, but are we willing to also let these plans be responsive to the ways our understanding of interconnectedness, of shared liberation, and belonging are deepened, right? And then as you are, you know, putting these action plans together, or revising them, revisiting them, what stories are emerging as you look at your action plan? Are these stories that you are willing to tell? And then an exercise that Adrienne Marie Brown does in her book, Emergent Strategy, is an invitation to this question: what's the furthest you can see, right? So if you believe, like I do, that budgets and even these climate action plans are moral documents, they're going to communicate what our commitments, what our values are, right? And so does that come through in this document so that if this is the only interaction they have with your organization, it's very clear where your commitments are and what your values are. And so in the same ways that we would ask that question of budgets and what we put on our website and employee handbooks and things like that, you know, can we ask that question as it pertains to the action plans that we have?
Thank you, Sophia. I'm feeling like 75 minutes is enough. We need a whole day retreat where we can dig deeper into all of this. The next question that we put up there was sort of anticipating a question that some of the members of the audience may ask. So I wanted to just see if the panel could share some of the challenges and barriers they've faced to climate action storytelling in higher ed, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, so I think, too far, my bad.
My bad.
We're both hitting the same button.
Go ahead.
So since my institute is a little bit smaller, we're a tribal college, we have three major challenges: funding, scope, and sustainability, because we're a sustainable development institute, got to tie sustainability into it. So funding is pretty much one of the major things. Our institute is heavily grant driven. We have awesome project ideas and they're great, but a good portion of the front-loaded effort is finding money for it. You know, you have the idea, but you got to finance it, especially for the time and effort for the people in it. As an example and as a resource, here are some one-year examples for potential funding. The first one is the American Indian College Fund's Native Arts Enrichment and Expansion Funding. That's what we actually use for both comic grants. It's a really good resource, and the American Indian College Fund does provide awesome stuff for it. And then also, if you're looking more so for digital media as a video project or an indigenous institution, I would recommend Vision Maker Media because they have like a cycle of grants or like funding opportunities, as well as a bunch of them for not only projects but also for youth orientated media classes. And then also, I found this out from my brother because he works with them for his project. They actually walk you through about how to operate the budget and work through your grants. So it's a very good starter grant. I would say both of those are very good. But then also, if you have larger grants, you can typically write media in it. That's mainly how the Institute was able to cover my time and effort as well by adding that aspect as a deliverable element to the research. The other one is scope. Project Comics was a really big project and we didn't realize it. It was our first attempt to approach the comics process, and our expectations were very much more than what we could potentially do. So there are obviously compromises in order to meet the goals. We split the original narrative in 2 issues. Rebecca, who's sitting right there, she was the original PI on it, and she was expecting like a 10-page comic, and Justin and I sent her 42 pages of script. So that was not meant to happen, but it's what happened, and I'm very thankful for the process that's going on through it. And so like compromises, splitting the narrative into 2 issues, but also reusing action figures as a way to create characters, and then expanding the project timeline across multiple grants. So obviously, if you want to do this and take a step into it, start smaller. Take some bite-sized experiences to learn the process, rely on experts within the field for potential gray zones you may not know about, and then work with new creators to give them something underneath their utility belt. And then the final one is sustainability. That's a lot of text. I'm not going to read all of that. But these do encapsulate some of the ideas that were presented by myself and my fellow panelists throughout the thing. I'm vamping a little bit in case if anyone wants to take a picture, but I'll also point out a couple ones. Natural environment is a good one because if you're looking to unearth unknown or unheard stories, we are very human-centric. We can also look at potential narratives that come from our non-human relatives such as flora and fauna. What if they were the main character? What's their perspectives? There's this great geoscience animation about a rock in its lifetime that goes over like 100 million bunch of years, and it just shows its lifetime in it as another perspective. So personification is a good way. Economics is also another avenue, potentially seeing as a way to finance it in the future, but also if you do take the project as a way to create money, and you kind of put it behind a paywall, and that kind of negates accessibility, which may be beneficial to your project in providing information at all. But yeah, I'll skip that over. But also, if you want to hear more about the model, Rebecca's giving a presentation about it tomorrow. So she goes way more in depth about it, and it's a really cool planning tool. And then I will pass it down. There you go.
So we're in academia, right? Higher education, data, research. I'm at an R1 and not a small one. My school is approaching 50,000 students. So we want data to help support the stories that we tell and the decisions to justify the decisions that we make. but it's going to be that lived experience of both the people who drive and work on our campus every single day, or the students that chose us as an institution. Those are the people that are going to be living and executing and then defending whatever it is in our climate action plans. And that's something that sometimes is not aware of, say, the planning or facilities department. They just see it as something that we need to put together, and then it gets buried, which is what had happened at UC. But it's those people that are going to be telling that. So there's a movement that I'm really attached to. It's called knowledge mobilization. It's this idea of intentional messaging that weaves together those intentional skills and knowledge to be actively engaging change. So it is the responsibility of the whatever administration or office to actually mobilize others. And that's why I see climate action plans as essentially three different things. One, a celebration document. What have you already done on campus that can be recognized and celebrated? And then it's a planning document. Okay, these are the actions that we're going to move forward on. And it's also an accountability document. And that's where UC's issue really got lost. They didn't assign who was going to do what and what time. And that's, I think, critical, because those are the characters, but it's also the responsibility. Who's going to keep the story going? Because stories themselves are both cyclical and linear. And you need to have that timeline of which who's going to keep the story going, but then keep the lessons learned. It's funny, I thought more about this process as the time went on. We just hosted Mitchell Thomas Show. For anybody who needs a little bit of a framework, he wrote a book. It's called The 9 Elements of a Sustainable Campus. This gentleman was the former president of Unity College. He was a presidential climate fellow of Second Nature years ago. His name, again, Mitchell Thomas Show. We just hosted him for a week. He said our plan was beautiful and great, but that there was no accountability, no follow-through. And that was the biggest challenge that we had. One example of that was we used to be a commuter school. And the interior of UC, which was a very large urban footprint, was just a massive parking lot. And it created a huge heat island on the campus. They scraped all that pavement away, and they built huge earthen mounds, which actually was somewhat in respect to the Shawnee and the Miami people who had earthen mounds in that area. And so that also not only is green space, but it's increased green space. Actually, when you build up and out, you increase the amount of green and vegetation that you had. But what Mitchell came and visited our campus and he saw was that we had no signage, we had no aesthetics, and we had no curriculum, passive curriculum, to share what we did as a campus to remove thousands upon thousands of square foot of asphalt and have both a cultural recognition and an actual green cooling space within the middle of campus. And he says, you need to treat every person that comes to your campus as a student, a vendor, an administrator, a parent, and you need to have signage and interpretation and art to help celebrate and showcase that story. And he's like, it's possibly the cheapest thing you can do. And one of the things about knowledge mobilization is that you're going to have this massive climate action plan document, break it up into little chunks and spread it around campus like fairy dust. Like, get it out there and share it. It's easy and accessible. I mean, I'm going to close this thought, but we have a beautiful overlook. And he says, it doesn't take much like a national park to say, hey, what am I looking at from campus? Share that spot with your framework and your action plan, and you get a lot more passive education and engagement to follow through.
All right, one more voice I'm bringing into this conversation is Leah Thomas, who wrote The Intersectional Environmentalist, How to Dismantle Systems of Oppression to Protect People and Planet. So when I think about this question about, what are some challenges and barriers that I've faced as we think about climate action, storytelling in higher ed, it's that it's a separation, right? That the work of DEI, belonging, anti-racism is somehow not so intertwined with this work of climate solutions, climate action, sustainability, and they're so connected. And if we are willing to not, well, maybe we don't know, but it is a fact in my mind, a not debatable fact that, we operate in these systems of, white supremacy, secular colonialism, all the oppressive systems that, whose goal is to really keep things separate, right? And so the invitation, I think, for us is, as we think about what stories to tell, that these are not separate stories, right? They might be two sides of the same coin, or, maybe a photo that you zoom in and zoom out of, but they're all connected, right? And so I think for me, it's interesting, I had a conversation with one of our diversity and equity VPs, and she made a comment why do they have to add, why do we have to add sustainability to this? DEI work is already a lot as it is. And it's true, it is. But if we can begin to see it as not like a piece of pie, right, that we're trying to fight over, and I get it, like we do have to, make a case for the resources that we're asking for. But if we can somehow see that if we care for the planet, we have to also care for the people who are on that planet, right? And the people who are impacted the most and who are experiencing the fastest rate of change are folks of color and folks who live on island nations, right? And folks who have been displaced and whose land has been taken. And so like, that has to be part of the conversation. And so for me, it's the more that we can inch toward making that narrative, much more visible and normalized and accepted, that these are not separate conversations. I think the more we can come to a place, again, back to this idea of like collective liberation, like we are all interconnected to the flora and fauna, to our physical spaces, our created spaces, and are all in relation to that in some way, right? To the human family, to the plants and the animals and the waters and the land that we are guests on. And so the more that we can more explicitly tie those together, I think the more we have a chance of doing good work together. In my office, I don't have an office, I'm a person. To try to make more explicit that connection, I'm on this little campaign to try to change our office and make it an actual division of equity, tribal affairs, and sustainability, show that explicit connection. It doesn't cost anything, but people talking about it. So what are the ways that we can make very explicit these commitments and these values that we have, right? And people might balk at the idea that like, oh, it's gonna cost money, but I think there are a lot of ways that we can think about how to cast that vision and how to invite other folks to imagine what this could really look like.
Thank you, Sophia. I feel like I've learned so much from all three of you during this whole process of designing this session. Before we turn it over to the audience, I wanted to just frame this thing that I think we're all storytellers, no matter where we fit in the ecosphere of the climate action plan that is happening or the sustainability work is happening, we're all storytellers. And years ago, I was at a digital sort of meeting in Vancouver, BC, and this is an anonymous quote that came up in this discussion about storytelling. So I just wanted to share that with you and invite questions from you all. And of course, we have some questions that we can pose for you, but totally great. Like, please ask the panelists any questions you have, and just keeping this in mind. Great. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Michael Kututu Johnson. I'm a professor at the University of Arizona in the School of Natural Resources and Environment. And I just want to say, I think storytelling is a great thing. I'm from the Hope Reservation. I was in this movie called Inhabitants. I don't know if you've ever seen that. That was an excellent documentary on how you involve tribal people in their communities and something like that. But what I was really thinking about being in higher education is what have any of you done to involve the youth in that? Because to me it sounds like if the youth can go out to their own communities, tell their own stories, and they get backed up, especially by those land grant institutions which are sitting on ceded Indian land that should be helping more than what they are. I just wanted to know, what is your impact that you think that the youth could have as far as some of the stories that you're telling from their perspective?
As one of those youths, I can share my story a little bit more. So the College of Menominee Nation, as I mentioned, has a sustainable leadership cohort where we take our high schoolers in our community, mainly indigenous, actually I think wholly indigenous. It encompasses both the Menominee tribe that we are from, but then also our neighboring reservations of the Oneida and Stockbridge. And we take them in and we give them the tools to create stories while also providing information and research about sustainability. And a lot of those, when I was in it, that was 11 years ago, and I was in it consistently every summer, so I got to see all the people who I go into that program not only become great storytellers, but also have significant roles in our community. Our language, at the time, I think there were only 10 speakers out of 10,000 people, and now there's a largely robust group that's taken an initiative to introduce it back, Menominee U and our Cultural Language and Preservation Society. But also, like, there are a lot of students that are in there. I got a name drop, Nanikwe Latender, who is also doing excellent work with revitalizing our culture. But we also have storytellers like Charlene Turtelot, who trained under Justin Gauthier, who is working in other organizations to share Indigenous perspectives. But then also we have like people in IT and other people who have grown out of that program to become empowered to see sustainability and expand more from just storytelling, but also to take on different roles of interest and becoming leaders in our tribes. So that's my perspective.
At the beginning I shared I was a public radio correspondent, and I was in Phoenix, and so I was surrounded by several different tribal nations. I did stories with the Salt River Pima Maricopa tribe, the Gila River tribe, but they reached out to me as a pitch, but I had to make an intentional choice as a white Anglo dude to go and amplify, to capture, but more importantly to listen, understand, and process, and understand I've got 4 minutes of airtime to share, but also more importantly respect. And a lot of times they were either STEM oriented, but it was usually an elementary school or some sort of project they were doing. But then I also, when I worked as a regular K-12 teacher, and then also in the youth media nonprofit, it was all about youth empowerment, but getting out of my adult head about what storytelling is and understanding as a student and as a youth that is usually ignored, what are the mechanisms? And one of the things is that not only youth, but all of you, we all have a insanely advanced media production studio in our pocket. This is a phenomenal curriculum tool. This is a phenomenal megaphone. And this is a phenomenal way to figure out to say what we want to talk about when we're too nervous or stuttering to say with our own mouths. But students need to be taught that. And that needs to be an intentional choice, even within our curriculum, to say, hey, look, I don't need to go to HR or marketing to get something across. I'm going to put in my curriculum for my students to go and share and capture a story of either their community, their parents, maybe a nonprofit that they work with who gets overlooked and needs help. So we need to be intentional about making that choice. And honestly, those are some of the best stories I've ever heard. Because you'll never hear them from anyone else unless maybe you go ask someone to go share that story. And it's usually those students. That was probably the biggest lesson I've ever gotten as an educator, was just I need to shut up and just put a prompt out there, but let others tell the story, then teach me something, and then give them a really good grade for it.
I want to thank you, and I want to open it up to other questions that folks have for the panelists, or just any question that you have. How about
There's a question.
Oh, please.
Hey, I'm curious. I mean, all of your approaches to communicating storytelling are different and very, incredibly creative. I'm an investment guy, so I'm going to get to success, like outcomes. How do you assess whether it's been successful?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean, is it how many impressions you've gotten?
Yeah. Okay. I hear you.
How do you think about it? 'Cause I don't want to put it on pure metrics. There's across the thoughts of like, this was a successful story we told.
Yeah, I mean, I have to answer your question with a question, but when we think about anything that out there that doesn't feel quantifiable, right? Piece of art, for example, I think there are. You could tie it back to what is the mission and vision of our organization, right? And start there, right? How is this story, whatever it is that you're creating, sort of in service to that or in alignment of that? And that's one way I think that you can measure some of those things and speak to their value. I think being able to take a step back and say, what would happen if we didn't tell these stories is also a question that we can ask, right? And stories are not free. They're at a cost, right? There's an emotional labor. There's a lot of labor that goes into being able to share a story. You're giving a part of yourself to someone. And so when I think about the value of a story, right, which I think is a part of the question, is, what is the value of someone sharing a piece of their life or their history or their culture, right? And I think that's a question that we have to ask. And we live in a world and are part of communities and institutions that, when it comes down to it, there has to be, well, that didn't get as many likes or didn't get as many shares, right? And I think we have to also ask ourselves what we hold valuable and what is going to be a metric for ourselves that we're going to hold ourselves to, right? And it might be that for some marketing communication purposes, that's one of them. But I hope that that is not the only thing that's guiding why we choose to tell the stories that we tell. And so stories in itself, don't exist. They're part of an ecosystem and a part of a community and a part of a shared space. And so I think the other part to that question is, how do the stories that we tell advance an understanding of who we are, we're trying to be or become, and that there's value in that.
Nick, did you have?
I can add something real quick and then pass it down. I do agree with what Sophia said. Because obviously, if we wanted to take our stories to a film festival and it's like, hey, we got #1 prize, that in itself is a metric, but I don't think that's one that we should hold ourselves to. From my perspective, I think any story is success if someone learns something from making it, from seeing it, or even interacting with it, or even if the filmmaker or the creator of it is able to share something on from what they've learned on the project. I find myself, whenever I make media, always learning something new, and then I'm excited to tell people about it. But then also from a capacity standpoint, at our college, the media that we create is sometimes used in the classrooms that we teach. So sometimes our interns can have their media in the class that they're learning from. So I think from our standpoint, I think that's successful if it's being used as a teaching tool within the community. So I'll pass it down.
Did you say you were tied to a university or an investment firm, or?
So I run a sustainable investment firm, and a lot of the challenges that we face in both trying to help people understand the challenges we're facing and how that investing next to it are similar challenges. It's an audience that's learning, maybe sometimes not interested in learning, but we also want to kind of provide some inspiration around what positive things can happen if we go down the right path. And so we're always trying to find ways that are effective at getting the message across. I find it incredibly difficult to make it successful. And I hear the same basic thing amongst university representatives here. It's trying to get change to happen on campus or in the community.
Right.
And so obviously storytelling is an important part of that, but how do you know which one was most successful?
What's landing?
Yeah.
I feel like the two words that are most adverse in the world of investing is vulnerability and risk. And those make for the best stories, is when you share that. And if I think of an investment firm as, we were willing to go out there and invest in something because it aligns to our mission in the world that we want to see. But, so we were leaders in this space, and maybe we took a hit, and I know that might be adverse to attracting other people and their dollars, or being stewards of an institution's dollars to make risks in this space. But it is those that are the leaders that go into the unknown. And I know this is really high level, wishy-washy language, but when you then articulate those choices into a story about how you evolved as an investing institution or entity to be pioneers in a space, that's compelling. As I've grown into my own personal finances and trying to make sound decisions of whom I want to share my dollars with, I do a little bit of safe thing. I'm a young dad, I don't want to blow my kid's college fund right out the gate. I'm really banking on tuition remission down the road. But at the same time, I have visions and values, and when I find an investment firm or some sort of something that speaks to me, I'm attracted to it. So the question is, do you want more people like me? Do you want to have other folks who resonate with you, or do you just want to have a shared story that's safe and safe and only shares success? And is that want to be your clientele? So again, I think you said it beautifully. What is your mission? What is your mission? What is your vision? And then you throw a SMART goal if you want to onto a story. Like, how is it measurable? Don't do it with impressions. We use that as such a BS measure when we approached funders when it came to some funding requests. But a lot of people were very, very old, and they said, that sounds good. But it was a weird reality I lived with when it came to grant funding. But it was, what is that resonance of moving that mission forward? I'm not sure if this is accurately answering what you want to hear.
It's really not intended to help me think about how to communicate to investors, but thinking about anyone who's trying to get other people to change around the issue about DEI and
Okay.
sustainability. What things have been shown to be most effective at that success? So I think everyone in this room,
Right.
this conference has the same challenges of changing some group of constituents' mindset.
I think it's what's that compelling narrative, and it's that shared risk and shared journey, and you're in a leadership space. But as far as how to account for how many people subscribe to that may be where those metrics come in.
Can
Sophia, go
as
ahead,
you
and
were
then I wanted to
speaking-
add something.
I was also just thinking, what is the story, who's it for, what is it in service of, right? And I think that sounds very transactional. And, I think about, call it a campaign, call it some, whatever you want to call it. Like, how are you trying to get people to move from here to here, right? And stories can help do that. But it's not without thought and intentionality around what that journey and process looks like. So whether it is you're using stories to communicate your theory of action or theory of change, and I think there are surveys and things like that you can collect along the way to gather sentiment and have folks' perspective change from hearing the story after 6 months of this campaign. So I think there are ways that you can build in. I want people to understand that we're not just talking about throw it all out there and it's just great that it exists. But yes, we do need to understand a return on this thing that we're doing.
Yeah, and it's actually a really interesting question, and I'm thinking about they're the metrics of success of a story, and I'm thinking about, well, what is the narrative shift that you're trying to make? What is that specific narrative shift that you're trying to make? Years ago, I did a digital story in 2006 on trash in San Francisco Bay, and yay, the Chronicle picked it up and put it on the front page. Now, is that a success metric? I don't know, but did it help shift perceptions of what kind of trash is in San Francisco Bay? Similarly, did a storytelling project with 5 stories across the country on green jobs in low-income communities across the country. We showed it at the Pioneers Conference in Marin County, and immediately one of those organizations that was featured in the Bronx got $10,000. Well, is that a success metric? And to me, it was okay, but the real metric was it started to change perception about who is doing green jobs, where they're being successful, what types of green jobs. So I think for me, that quantitative is one thing, but the qualitative and the narrative shift that happened because of the storytelling, it's harder to measure and put it in ROI type terms, but it is beautiful when you can sort of see it and you can tangibly sort of talk about it. We're a minute over, but there's nobody coming to this room, so if folks have another couple of questions, happy for the panelists. Maybe what kind of stories do you have any stories that you felt a challenge wanting to tell, but challenged to tell them? Maybe that's, folks have any examples or anything really? Right.
You're all here. You all have a story about what you're trying to change on campus. So you don't have to share that per se, but it is about inviting people into the conversation.
There's a question.
Yeah.
So one thing that came up for me when y'all were talking is that a quote by Mary Oliver: "The man who has many answers is often found in the theaters of information where he offers gracious
Thank you for sharing. There's someone in the back, yeah?
Yeah, I'm Joel Rogers from African and the University of Wisconsin-Madison, mostly here for African. I should think the measure of a successful story, if we get into the metrics of how it's actually good, would be A, something that was remembered, and B, made sense of something that the recipient of the story had previously not quite understood and or not felt inclined to act on.
I love telling stories with my students. I love it when they tell me stories. And the fact that we choose to tell stories is probably the most important thing out of all of this. I could very easily lecture and regurge a reading or a PowerPoint, but like a lot of times I will stop and share. I mean, as an environmental educator, you almost ask any other environmental educator why they are an environmental educator, and you will get a beautiful story about them, like playing in a creek as a kid, you know, or some weird, like, why are they spraying fog to get rid of mosquitoes? And like a very visual, I mean, for our older environmental educators. And those are very visceral visuals that somehow stimulate extrasensory learning, even if you're not smelling or seeing things, but you're creating those very sharp visuals. And so I think that might be, for me at least, the choice to tell stories and to share other people's stories to get across the point I'm trying to make as far as teaching XYZ environmental or STEM concept. For me, that's the start, is just make space for stories.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, I'm all for storytelling. We spend 95+% of our time on the planet around campfires at night telling each other stories. So I understand that is a very, very, very good way. It's probably the only way to actually communicate in a popular way. All I was saying, I was trying to respond to the investment.
Right.
I advertise myself as investment. The ROI on the story, and I agree, it's not going to be precise ROI, would be, is this memorable, which tells you the person remembers it, and then do they use it in any way for actions they might otherwise not have engaged in? I think that's a simple measure of a successful story.
It actually also boils down to, like, was the story told ethically? And this is something that I go very deep into. My job as communications director and comms person in nonprofits for over 20 years, and really working through, like, is a success measure, was there deep consent? Was there real acknowledgement of the protagonist in the story? And how was that communicated to them? Did they walk away feeling good about this story? I was telling stories about people coming out of incarceration for a long time, and it's a really tricky slope. But they're amazing stories, but it was really important for us to write up an ethical storytelling protocol around how we tell the story. How do we get deep consent? So I think that applies not just to something as crazy as mass incarceration in this country, but any kind of story we're telling. And where are the voices of whose story we're telling, to Sophia's and others' point earlier. So, folks, I want to be respectful of everyone's time, and but we're here, and if anyone has any questions, please come up. There's a sign-up sheet over there if you want to leave your name. If you're a Second Nature member, we would love to amplify your stories through our storytelling initiatives. So please leave us your name and contact information. We'll send some resources and links that we'll mention here. Thank you so much for everything.